There are close to 300 million vehicles in America alone, which is close to one for every American. And in the world, that number is 1.5 billion vehicles. But for the past year, I've been living without one. I know that for a lot of people, this is almost unthinkable. And for most of my life, I assumed that when I was an adult, I'd have at least one car. It's just what I was conditioned to expect. But living without a car has literally been life-changing, which is why I wanted to share my experience. So let me tell you why I decided to live without a car and the 3 most important pieces of advice I'd give to anybody looking to do the same. And if you stick around until the end, I'll even share how living without a car could help you retire literally a decade sooner. 1 year ago, I moved from Colorado Springs, Colorado to Washington, D.C. to start my first career job. I had just graduated college, and it was time to become a real adult. But whereas most people moving to a new city would plan on buying a car, I had a different plan in mind. I stuffed a bicycle in the back of my parents' van and made a commitment to living without a car for as long as possible. Now, I would love to say that I made this commitment to live with no car for a noble reason, like saving the planet, or at least to preserve my own health. But while lower emissions and better physical health are certainly important to me, they aren't the real reason that I decided to live without a car. Really, the reason I decided to live without a car is because 5 years earlier, I discovered the Mr. Money Mustache blog. If you aren't familiar, Mr. Money Mustache was one of the pioneers of the early retirement community. By living frugally, he reached financial freedom at 31 years old and became a full-time dad. The Mr. Money Mustache blog was a huge inspiration for me. When I was in high school, I made the commitment to reach financial freedom before I turned 30 years old. And to do that, I knew I had to keep my expenses extremely low. While Mr. Money Mustache did own a car, one of the ways he was able to save so much money was by biking almost everywhere. But I wanted to take this a step further. If I could bike everywhere, why not avoid the cost of buying a vehicle entirely, and also save money on insurance, maintenance, and gas prices? So that's exactly what I did. But before I get into just how big of an impact this is, and how it could help you retire a decade faster, let me share the 3 most important lessons I've learned from this experiment. If you're planning to live without a car yourself, this is the part of the video that's meant for you. Because while I'm enjoying life without a car, it might not be an easy transition. Living without a car was a completely new experience for me. I mean, I didn't need a car in college, but I went to a tiny college where I could walk everywhere on campus. Living without a car as an adult taught me some new things. First up is the importance of location. Location matters, and it matters a lot. When I was searching for apartments, I cast a pretty small net. I think I limited my search to just 3 or 4 miles from my office. While I enjoy the outdoors as much as anybody, I wasn't wild about potentially biking through 10 miles of rain or snow. Commute times can easily spiral out of control, and the weather does not always cooperate. For my car-owning coworkers, they wouldn't even bat an eye at a 10-mile commute. Many of them are willing to commute for 45 minutes to an hour every single day, which is absolutely mind-boggling to me. When people tell me that biking isn't a feasible option for them, it's usually because they've already made poor choices. If you want to live without a car, you have to be extremely picky about where you choose to live. But living close to your office isn't the only requirement for a bike-friendly lifestyle, which is why my second piece of advice is to really map out your life. For example, I know that there are 3 places I need to go every single week. Those places are my office, a gym, and a grocery store. Those 3 locations were my requirements. I knew that if I couldn't find a place to live that was either in walking or biking distance to my office, a gym, and a grocery store, I'd have to buy a car. Narrowing down my search that way revealed just a few reasonable locations. From there, I really targeted my search. Eventually, I found a pretty good deal, which I might have missed otherwise. Everything else was extra. It'll be tough to find a bike-friendly place to live if you're really picky about all the different things you want to be close to. That said, I was lucky enough to end up pretty darn close to a public library, a cute little park, and a bus stop. That actually brings me to my third major point, which is to leverage public transportation. I know that this is easier some places than it is others. especially in America where public transit isn't very well developed. That said, I think a lot of people never even bother to look. For me personally, my office is located very near a metro stop, which opened up a lot of other places that I could have potentially lived. I didn't end up utilizing this, but it was a great option to have. So make sure that you check out your local metro and bus stops for whatever area you live in. Okay, I've already told you that saving money was my primary reason for living without a car. But just how much of an impact is this really making? Well, it might be more than you think. In a past video, I compared my expenses to an average American. In that video, I showed that the average American spends $10,000 a year on transportation alone. Compare that to my situation. So far, my bicycle hasn't cost me anything, which means I spend $0 on transportation. That's a big part of why, in 2023, I'm on track to spend less than $20,000 in the year. And most of that $20,000 is just rent. Now, everybody should want to save an extra $10,000 a year. But that's actually more important than you might think. The 4% rule of thumb is commonly used as an approximation for how much money you need to be financially free. Using this rule, you would need 25 times your annual expenses to be able to retire. That means that if you can reduce your expenses by $10,000, you're not just $10,000 closer to independence. You also need $250,000 less dollars to retire. And according to the Federal Reserve, $250,000 is approximately the net worth of the average 50-year-old American. Let that sink in. By living without a car and keeping my transportation expenses close to $0, I've effectively made myself $250,000 closer to financial freedom, the same amount of wealth that the average American spends 20 to 30 years to accumulate. Even better, I can invest that $10,000 that I would otherwise be spending on transportation. If I earned a 7% inflation-adjusted return for the next 30 years, that money would have grown to almost $1 million. Now, I'm not sure if I actually will live without a car for the next 30 years, but having $1 million at 50 and needing $250,000 less dollars to retire does sound pretty good to me. And hey, one last thing before you go. One thing that makes it a lot easier to live without a car is if you can work remotely. And work from home is extremely popular even with those that aren't trying to live without a car. But I'm not so convinced that working from home is a good idea. In fact, I recently published a video about why I think working from home could be a huge career mistake. So check that video out next if you're interested, and I'll see you next time.